Today, the White House is offering a vigorous defense of the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, after reports that he shared sensitive military plans with his wife, his brother, and others in a second Signal group chat, and after some of Hegseth's former top advisors warned about turmoil inside the Pentagon under Hegseth's leadership. Here's Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt earlier today.
Let me reiterate, the president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth in the change that he is bringing. They were Pentagon employees who leaked against their boss to news agencies in this room. And it's been clear since day one from this administration that we are not going to tolerate individuals who leak to the mainstream media, particularly when it comes to sensitive information.
CNN's Jeff Zeleny is live for us at the White House with the latest. Jeff, what are you learning?
Well, Brianna, sensitive information is what is at issue here. If you think back and sort of look beyond the allegations of a smear campaign, the questions are why the defense secretary decided to put sensitive information, perhaps classified information about strikes on Yemen into a group chat, if you will, sharing it with his wife, sharing it with his brother who works at the Pentagon, his lawyer, and others. And what judgment was he using to do that? Now, the White House and the defense secretary have tried to deflect from all of these questions, saying they are part of a smear campaign, but answering very little about why these questions are being asked in the first place about the judgment of the defense secretary. But this is all coming amid many more questions at the defense secretary. Several top officials who were loyal to this defense secretary have been reassigned or removed from the Pentagon amidst a leak investigation. So the bottom line to all of this, as the presidency reaches his 100 days in office next week, there is considerable turmoil here at the Defense Department. So the president is standing by him. There's no question about that. But behind the scenes, there are deep questions about how far this can go on. So the Senate also concerned when they come back into town next week after their Easter recess, expect these questions to continue. But the defense secretary says he's being smeared and the White House is standing by him. Brianna?
All right, Jeff Zeleny, thank you for that report. CNN's Natasha Bertrand is with us now live from the Pentagon. And Natasha, Secretary Hegseth confirmed today he did share information on a second Signal group chat. What did he say about the kind of information that he shared?
Yeah, Brianna, Secretary Hegseth went on Fox this morning and he did acknowledge that he had this second Signal group chat with his wife and his brother and his personal lawyer. But he said that it was more about communicating media strategy with some of his closest advisors. And he again denied that he was sharing any kind of classified information. Here's a bit of what he said this morning.
What was shared over Signal, then and now, however you characterize it, was informal, unclassified coordinations. In this point, those folks who were leaking, who have been pushed out of the building, are now attempting to leak and sabotage the president's agenda.
So those individuals that he's referring to who were fired last week are two of his closest longtime advisors, Dan Caldwell, who was a senior advisor, and Darren Selnick, who was the Pentagon's deputy chief of staff, as well as the deputy Pentagon deputy secretary of defense as chief of staff, Colin Carroll. It's a mouthful there. They were all fired following a leak investigation, and Hegseth is now accusing them of trying to undermine him by revealing things in the press that are unflattering. It's worth noting here, however, that these are people that were brought in large part by Secretary Hegseth. And while the White House has said that the entire Pentagon is working against the secretary, again, these are individuals that were longtime close associates of Secretary Hegseth that were given jobs by him. So it's unclear at this point why he is trying to blame them for his apparent participation in this Signal group chat in which he shared this information. But it seems like at this point he's remaining defiant. He understands that President Trump is, at least for now, standing behind him. Brianna.
All right, at least for now. Natasha Bertrand, live for us at the Pentagon. Thank you. Boris?
With us now to discuss is Mark Short. He's the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. Mark, I wonder what you make of all of this, specifically the fact that, as Natasha pointed out, these were staffers that Hegseth has known for a long time, and he's essentially accusing them of betraying him and trying to block the president's agenda.
Right. I think in this case, these are political appointees that Pete likely handpicked. These are not career government officials working inside the Pentagon. For the life of me, Boris, I don't understand why they haven't simply said, look, this was a mistake. We've put in protocols to make sure this doesn't happen again, and allows them to move on. I think there's probably a lot of things the White House would rather be talking about, like recruitment being up, the airstrikes against the Houthis going well. There are things that they could be actually promoting that's happening over at the Pentagon, but as long as they're trying to have an argument of whether this was really classified or not classified, the story's just going to keep going.
President Trump himself has repeated sort of that refrain that the operation against the Houthis was successful, and he leans into that. But I wonder, with the stuff we're hearing from the secretary about leaks and about eliminating leaks and that sort of view that there are people trying to block him and the administration from remaking the Pentagon, whether Trump at some point sees this as a political liability.
I think that the president still has faith in Pete. I think that the president doesn't want to sort of have somebody dismiss this early and appear as if it's a mistake. And I think he knows, probably from the first administration experience, that even if you release somebody of their duty, it's not as if some of the controversy goes away. And so I think he's one to dig in, as you know, and I think he's one to double down. But I don't think that having this be the front and center of the news story is helpful to the administration. And that's why, again, I don't understand why there isn't just a concession that, look, this was a mistake. We've put in protocols to make sure it doesn't happen again, and we're moving on.
How much of that digging in do you think is a reflection of the amount of political capital that it took to actually get Hegseth confirmed?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Boris. I think the reality is a lot of people assume that he was not going to get confirmed, and when he dug in and got support to get across the finish line, I'm sure that helps to reinvigorate you to say, look, I can withstand this, and I'm going to fight harder. But again, I think that American people have a lot of grace, and this is one that I think one of the reasons the story's still alive is because a lot of Americans have texted people and had it as a mistake, right? This is a very relatable story, but it's one that you don't want to see the leader of the Defense Department texting or sending via signal of war plans. And so I think that for a lot of Americans, it's like, we can understand, but just admit it's a mistake, and we put in protocols so it won't happen again.
To your point, I don't think a lot of Americans have access to the kinds of information that he does.
Yeah, well, and that's why they understand. It's like, I'm not in a position of making that sort of a mistake. They've made the same mistake of texting something they shouldn't have texted to the wrong person, but nothing, like you said, war plans.
What is your view of his strategy, his media strategy, taking on this very animated approach and going on Fox News and sort of making this about the enemies of Donald Trump, the enemies of the administration?
Again, as you said, during the confirmation process, I think that was very successful for him in rallying Republican supporters behind him. I'm not sure that it's great to have the Secretary of Defense, there with the Easter Bunny at the White House egg roll as the venue for having some of these defense. But look, I've said what I think should be their proper protocol to get this behind them.
Do you think that might be the approach we'll see moving forward?
I don't think so at this point. I think that they've decided they're going to double down and keep fighting this. And I think that's going to continue to keep the story narrative alive. And it's why, your network and others are going to continue to cover it, because they're not moving on from it.
Let's discuss with Democratic Congressman from Washington State, Adam Smith. He is the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. I want you to react to what you just heard there from the press secretary, that this is part of a coordinated smear campaign. Hegseth himself earlier today saying that essentially this is disgruntled employees. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, what monumental change is Ms. Leavitt talking about? I follow this fairly closely at the Pentagon. Nothing much has changed at the Pentagon in terms of making it more efficient, making it more effective. The war in Gaza goes on. We, started bombing in Yemen. There's been no significant improvements in acquisition or procurement. So the only change that we've seen is an effort to ban books and fire people that Trump thinks are disloyal to him. And we've seen this throughout the Pentagon. They're not just banning books, they're banning words. Apparently you can't say the word gay anywhere in the Department of Defense anymore. They fired C.Q. Brown, an incredibly qualified chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I would challenge them, what monumental change are you talking about that has anything to do with improving the national security of this country or making the Pentagon more efficient and more effective? We don't see any of that. we see a lot of the purging of people based on loyalty. And again, we see all of the book banning and the culture war. But how is that bringing about monumental change, number one? Number two, evidence is pretty clear here. I mean, they shared the first group chat with a reporter who showed very clearly that Secretary Hegseth was sharing sensitive, classified information right before a military attack, and they chose to ignore that. So I don't know what they're talking about in saying that he's bringing about monumental change, and that's why people are criticizing him.
The Pentagon maintains, Congressman, that nothing that was shared was classified. You obviously have reason to think that there were sensitive materials, that it should be classified. I wonder what you make, in Hegseth's words, of him sharing, quote, informal, unclassified coordinations for media coordinations and other things via Signal. Is it appropriate for him to be doing that with his brother, his wife, and his personal attorney?
Yeah, I don't know what he means by that, but I can't imagine anything within the internal workings of the Pentagon that you need to be sharing on a Signal chat with your wife or your attorney or your brother. So, I mean, that's just not appropriate to set that up in the first place. But second, let's go back to that first chat where you showed Secretary Hegseth saying when we were going to attack, where we were going to attack, and what we were going to attack with an hour or so prior to an attack. If Secretary Hegseth doesn't think that that kind of information should be classified, then we've got a much, much bigger problem in that he doesn't fundamentally understand a key aspect of his job.
To be clear, both his brother Phil Hegseth and Tim Parlatore, the Secretary's attorney, work at the Pentagon. Do you have any issues with that?
Sorry, again, we don't really know, and you're right, that was a bit of an overstatement. If in fact these are people who work at the Pentagon and have need for that information, that's fine. But it's mostly non-specific. We don't know why, and I certainly don't know why his wife would be on a formal chat like that. But we just don't know enough about what's happening on that piece of it. But we do know what was on that one Signal chat, as I mentioned before. And again, I did not initially call for Secretary Hegseth to resign when the Signal chat came out. I called for him to resign when he reacted to it by saying, we're not going to do anything about it. This is standard operating procedure, nothing to see here, no big deal. I mean, if he wasn't even going to try to fix it, look, I mean, classified sensitive information, it can be difficult. On the House Armed Services Committee, every once in a while, things will come out. We'll have to remind members that we're in a classified setting, don't say this. But to do that and then say, no, this is just the way we're going to do things, and to make no effort to fix it, to make no effort to improve operational security when you have such a clear flaw in it, I mean, that's just incompetent.
Congressman, it struck me that Dan Caldwell, one of the DOD aides that Hegseth fired, expressed some doubt to Tucker Carlson about whether there was actually an investigation into leaking. And as you heard from, or you may have not heard, but Secretary Hegseth was really digging in on this idea that they were going to crack down on leaks at the Pentagon earlier today. But here, Caldwell says that there's a lot of evidence that there is not a real investigation. How do you make sense of that? Would you have him and some of these others that were fired come in and testify before House Armed Services?
We should, and certainly I'm going to press the majority to do that. I mean, sadly, the Republicans are in the majority. They would have to make that decision. Now, we're going to have a hearing next week on a resolution of inquiry that I filed to ask some of these questions, so we will have a public discussion about it. But the biggest thing I make of this is, I don't think there is an investigation. I think there's a purge. I mean, Donald Trump made no mistake about it. He ran for a second term as president because he wants vengeance on his enemies. And that's certainly playing out across the government in a wide variety of ways, pulling security details and security clearances from people he perceives to be his enemies. So I think Mr. Caldwell's probably right. What's happening at the Pentagon is probably more of a purge, just to try to make sure that people stay loyal and understand the two-step process there. One, yes, you fire people that the president perceives as not being loyal. But the other thing is when you fire those people, it has a chilling effect on everybody else. Everybody else who stays knows if I want to keep my job. It's not about doing the job well. It's not about representing the American people, protecting national security. It's about being absolutely loyal to Donald Trump. So I think Mr. Caldwell's probably right. It's more of a purge than an investigation.
But quickly, Congressman, my understanding from reading the reporting is that these folks were actually hired by Secretary Hegseth. So what does that tell you?
Yeah, well, I guess that gets to my second point that, I mean, if you're willing to fire anyone, that really sort of amps up the chilling message. But there's an aspect of it I don't fully understand. Maybe Secretary Hegseth believed that they had been leaking or somehow weren't loyal in some way. But I think the overarching thing that says is it points to the articles that have been written and the people who have been quoted about the level of chaos going on at the Pentagon. And whatever Ms. Leavitt has to say, it doesn't seem to be that they're bringing about monumental change. They're just doing a bad job of running a very important organization right now. And I think we all need to hope that they get better.
Congressman Adam Smith, thanks for sharing your point of view.
Thanks for giving me the chance. I appreciate it.
All right, so you ready for Signalgate 2.0? Because this scandal brings some new characters into the chat, with a familiar face still front and center. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Now we're learning that he had actually a second Signal Group thread on his personal phone, detailing sensitive material about the military attack against Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, this chat included his wife, his brother, and his lawyer. Now, his brother and lawyer, they now have Defense Department jobs, but it's not clear why they would have needed to know about an impending military strike. The White House is having to deny a report that it's looking to replace Hegseth, and President Trump, he is publicly backing him.
Mr. President, are you concerned about the level of chaos and dysfunction that's being described at your Pentagon?
There's no dysfunction at all. Ask the Houthis how much dysfunction there's none. Pete's doing a great job. Everybody's happy with him. They just bring up stories. I guess it sounds like disgruntled employees. He was put there to get rid of a lot of bad people, and that's what he's doing. So you don't always have friends when you do that.
Now, Hegseth himself, he's echoing Trump and chalking the whole thing up to former aides with an axe to grind.
See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me.
Now, we're learning some major power struggles are happening inside the Pentagon right now. Hegseth fired 3 of his top officials just last week, but they deny leaking anything.
Did you leak classified information against the wishes of your superiors to media outlets?
Absolutely not.
Did you photograph classified material and then text pictures of that material to an NBC News reporter?
Absolutely not. If I actually did some of the things that anonymous people on the internet and in the Pentagon are saying I did, I'd be in handcuffs.
And it goes without saying, 2 of the people he fired are incredibly close to him. I mean, the man you just heard, Dan Caldwell, has worked for Hegseth for years. But the White House is casting them as bad actors and sticking to the same script as last time, that no classified information was contained in that chat.
And this is what happens when the entire Pentagon is working against you and working against the monumental change that you are trying to implement. No classified information was shared in these chats.
But what would have happened if a uniformed officer did the same thing? Well, a former defense secretary, he has some idea.
That uniformed officer would be summarily dismissed and fired for having really created a major breach in security. Make no mistake about it, we are talking about top secret information when you're talking about attack plans.
So even if Trump says that he is standing by Hegseth, and he is saying something to the effect, some are predicting that the writing is already on the wall. Take it from a former official who got canned in the first Trump administration.
I think he's used up his bank account with Donald Trump. Trump doesn't want to have to waste his resources defending his people, and that's now what he's doing on Hegseth. So I think Hegseth has a shelf life of undetermined length, but it's not going to be much longer, would be my guess. 3 months, 4 months, something like that.
Well, with me now, former associate counsel to President George W. Bush, Jamil Jaffer, former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary under President Joe Biden, Sabrina Singh, and CNN political commentator Shermichael Singleton. Glad to have you on. You already heard Bolton giving a rough timeline of what he thinks. No one really knows the answer, but of course Trump. But this is another Hegseth and Signal scandal. I go back to Hollywood, right, and thinking about you're on a need-to-know basis. Why would this particular group of participants be on a need to know? We're talking about his wife, his brother, his lawyer, about military strike plans.
It's hard to know why they would need to know that. It does appear this Signal group was set up before he was confirmed to try and give him advice on his confirmation and the like. And he may have just been in the habit of sending them information about what's going on at the Pentagon to get advice. This seems like the wrong thing to be sending information out about. Certainly unwise. Whether it's illegal or not, different question. Definitely unwise, not a smart play. Could put people in danger if the wrong person's in that chat. And we've already seen reporters who didn't mean to be in a chat in the PC small group as well.
I mean, we've seen this movie play out recently in terms of a Signal scandal, but the idea, you heard Panetta, what he said, Sabrina, the idea of attack plans, of course, targets and weapons. Now, the administration, this is not classified information, but that category of information is particularly serious and sensitive.
Well, that type of information is classified before an operation begins. So if what is being reported is that the secretary put this information in both of these Signal chats, one with his wife, his brother, his personal lawyer, and then one with the entire national security apparatus that Mike Waltz started, any information before an operation has begun is classified. Doesn't matter what the secretary says about it. It's classified information. You have fighter pilots up in the air. They're there, sometimes hours before an operation begins. Then you have the secretary detailing when the bombs are going to drop, when the Tomahawks are going to deploy, when the F-18s are going to be up. All of that, I can tell you, I've looked at that TikTok at the Pentagon. It's all completely classified. So what the secretary did is put our fighter pilots at risk and our sailors at risk that are in the Red Sea conducting those operations.
How are we back here again, Shermichael? And of course, the White House trying to offer some semblance of an explanation and defense, knowing that Trump is still publicly backing him. I mean, this is more than political if you're talking about the safety of our esteemed members of our service.
Sure. I mean, look, the mission was successful, and I think that has to be acknowledged. Two, this occurred around the same time as the first incident. Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, did acknowledge, like, hey, we made a mistake here. We got to make some changes. Even the president, which he rarely ever does on camera, acknowledged, like, hey, we got to improve this process. From my understanding, they have since done that. Now, we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. But remember, the administration spent a ton of political capital trying to get Hegseth confirmed. I do not believe the president is in the mood or temperament to remove this guy less than 100 days in. We'll see, again, what happens over the next, several weeks. If this occurs third time, fourth time, then I think some things may change. But if this is all in the past and they've learned from it, they're communicating differently, they've made some reforms, which you should do when you make errors and mistakes such as this, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Well, from Signalgate to this larger issue, Sabrina, because you've got Hegseth's former top Pentagon spokesman, John Olliott, who quit last week, as you recall. He wrote in a scathing op-ed the following, that the Pentagon is, quote, in disarray under Hegseth's leadership. Now, he called it a month of total chaos. How does this impact the morale and the ability and efficiency of people at the Pentagon when all this is happening, in addition to that statement?
Yeah, I think when you have the Secretary of Defense firing, senior leadership around him, and those senior leaders have been coordinating on, whether it be major operations all around the world or just general management of the building, the military, what makes our military so great and so effective is that it thrives on order and processes. And so when you disrupt that, that injects chaos into a system that doesn't like chaos. We like order and being able to conduct our operations with the people that have been involved with them from the beginning. So, I saw that op-ed, and I think, yes, there is a tremendous amount of damage that has been done to the institutions there. But you have to remember that if these people were fired because they, disclosed classified information, they're technically being held accountable for it. And the person that's not being held accountable is the Secretary of Defense.
Well, on that point, Jamal, I mean, the statements that have been made by Secretary Hegseth has been about, I'm paraphrasing him, disgruntled aides, people with axes to grind. We've seen this play out in prior administrations, including the Trump administration, where the accusation is that your axe to grind undermines your credibility fundamentally and fatally. Does this give you pause when you hear statements like it's in disarray under his leadership and you have other things talking about? Is the politics more, or is this about truth?
Well, look, I mean, John Elliott was also just demoted, right? And so he may very well have an axe to grind. He was defending the Secretary of Defense just 4 or 5 days ago,
Right.
and now he's coming after him in an op-ed while he's saying he's still really loyal to him. So you got to wonder about that. But on top of that, you've got all these people right around Hegseth, around the Deputy Secretary of Defense, key senior advisors, the Chief of Staff, the Deputy Chief of Staff, a senior advisor, all being fired simultaneously. This is not a good look in any administration. This one, another administration, just makes it chaotic itself, right? Regardless of whether the entire building's in disarray, this number of firings is brutal and makes it hard to get your job done.
You worked for Dr. Carson in the first administration, Jermichael, and obviously a notable Washingtonian here, focusing on what administrations do to function efficiently.
Sure.
How do you view this?
I mean, look, operationally, to your point, efficacy matters. And my hope is that the secretary is stepping into this, getting comfortable with the role, realizing maybe I brought some of my old friends who were very loyal to me to the points that you made that may not have been the best individuals for the job. I think oftentimes you'll find people think, well, I'm going to bring folks who I trust, who I know. They're going to help me succeed as a leader. And you realize pretty quickly that they may not be the best individuals to help you succeed. And so I'm hoping that's the realization that the secretary is having, and he's going to make those changes in the course correction moving forward to bring on more capable, qualified people so that he can be successful at the job.
Well, if he himself is the one they're questioning of capability, that'll be a big question. And of course, the big one on everyone's mind, do you have the same grace for a second administration, second term? We'll have to see. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.
CNN Global Affairs analyst Brett McGurk is with us now. He served as coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa at the National Security Council during the Biden administration. He also served in both the Obama and Trump administrations. And thank you so much for being with us. You hear the White House press secretary there. She's saying that Hegseth is doing a tremendous job and that the results that he's achieved thus far speak for themselves. I am curious just sort of what you think of that, what kind of job he's doing. Are you seeing that he's made major changes so far?
I mean, I think the most significant news this week are the people who he picked, who are now out, who are saying the Pentagon is in a full-blown meltdown. So these are his people. These are Trump appointees. This is a huge problem. Something is going on here that is deep and structural. This is why this is so important. The Yemen bombing campaign against the Houthis, this first signal chat, this has now been ongoing for over a month. I think I was on the show a month ago saying this is probably going to go on for 6 months. It's a serious campaign. I know something about it. We helped develop it in the last administration and kind of handed over the planning. This is serious. We have our airmen and our Navy personnel who are undertaking this campaign. CENTCOM's doing a great job, but you cannot have this kind of disarray at the Pentagon. You know, the chain of command goes from the Pentagon, from the President to the Secretary of Defense. That's the chain of command, and then down to the combatant commands. This is so important for the protection of our country. Every military deployment, everything runs through that office. So to have an insider say it's a full-blown meltdown, a Trump appointee, that's a real concern.
Because specifically, and we're now hearing from them, right? But you're someone we should know. You made a decision to resign. You were a holdover, which was pretty rare from the Obama into the Trump administration, and you ultimately made a decision to resign when he decided to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. And you weren't the only one of note. But then we see the Pentagon spokesman, former John Elliott. He resigned. And he went out there and he wrote about it. And he was saying that he thinks that Hegseth essentially should not be long for the world at the Pentagon. Do you think that's the case? I mean, do you have any sense of what that might be?
Look, I don't know. Trump administration, I served for 2 years for President Trump. Look, I want this administration to succeed. I support that campaign against the Houthis. It's important. You just can't have this kind of disarray in the Pentagon. And Trump, who's famous for holding people accountable, I would expect eventually there's going to be a change. But we'll see. I mean, this type of disarray in that office is just a huge problem. And as John Elliott said in that letter, it's a distraction for the president that he supports. So eventually, I think a change will have to be made here.
He is known more for holding people to account who split with him. That is very much the truth. So as long as Hegseth is aligned with him, which he still is very much, and we saw how much political capital was expended when it came to putting him in this position. It was Vice President Vance who broke the tie, right, in the Senate. With that in mind, and if you are Iran, right, you're in the middle of negotiations. if you are if you're Russia, how are you seeing this with this chaos going on at the Pentagon? How do they actually look at this and try to take advantage of it?
Great question. I mean, if I was in the White House now in a national security role and seeing another foreign country, a foreign adversary, having this level of 5 senior officials being basically walked out of the Pentagon, the most senior military command of that foreign capital, I would think they got some real problems under the surface. If this is just what we're seeing, imagine what is actually going on. And what test administrations are not just what they plan for, what they come in and plan to do, is the things that don't happen. It's a major cyber attack. We fired the head of Cyber Command, the head of NSA. It's a major foreign attack. We don't know what's coming. And when that moment comes, you have to be ready, and you have to have an Office of Secretary of Defense that is organized and disciplined. And the leadership 101 is you take accountability, you hold yourself responsible, and you protect people under you. And there's no responsibility. It's just constant deflection. You had Adam Smith on the show here earlier in the hour, the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, and he said something very important. He said he didn't call for Hegseth to resign until all this deflection and just refusal to take responsibility, which in the Pentagon, in the military, is 101. You have to take responsibility for your actions, hold yourself accountable, and hold those below you accountable. And so at the top of the Pentagon, they're basically saying, I did nothing wrong, this is all made up, even those people I picked who are turning on me. It's just a total lack of responsibility and accountability, which will permeate through the system.
His demeanor as you watch that interview, I mean, my impression was that he seems not fully in command of the moment. He's certainly under fire, even as we see the White House defending him. What was your impression of what you saw, of his demeanor?
Honestly, I think what has come out from these insiders that this is disarray, it's chaos, it's a full-blown meltdown. I think it's reflective of that. I've worked for 6 secretaries of defense. I've worked for 4 presidents. I've never seen anything like this. With high-level appointees from the administration, these are political appointees, people that Hegseth chose, coming out and telling the American people this. So I think there's a lot more below the surface.
All right, we'll be looking to see if that reveals itself. Brett McGurk, thank you.